It's our specialty. House made.
It's local.
Local. Organic. Almost organic.
Not even close.
Alright. Here we go.
Free range.
Okay, I'm Liz Brooks, and out in the field today speaking with Peter Murphy and Gibson Caldwell at the Public House here in Riverwest. Now, what makes this establishment slightly different is this public house is a business, and the type of business they cater in general, known as a pub, bar, tavern, hard drinking establishment. Now, that's not unusual for Milwaukee, which seems to have a watering hole every other block. But what makes this public house here in Riverwest unique as a business is it is a cooperative, a co-op. Most listeners will think of a co-op as an autonomous association of people who volunteer their time for a mutual social, economic, and cultural benefit. Cooperatives are generally nonprofit community organizations owned and managed by people who use its services. I've never heard of a co-op tavern. Can you give us an idea how different this is, if at all, from what most people are used to with, say, a co-op grocery store or a workers' co-op?
I think Gibson might be able to talk up to the difference between the grocery store and the bar possibly a little better than I would.
It's true. In a lot of ways it's similar in that it's member-owned, where a workers' co-op is worker-owned, but they also make up the membership. And like any co-op, it's one member, one vote. Similar to some food co-ops, we offer discounts on our products to our members. What makes it unique being a tavern is that there really aren't any others. There's one that opened in Austin, a cooperatively owned brewery and pub, and called the Black Star Co-op. And I just saw one today in, I think, Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, really?
Getting ready to open. The 5th Street Co-op, and it's also going to be a brewery and tavern. So,
I heard there's going to be one in Portland or Seattle, and then I heard there's another co-op, either co-op brewery or co-op brew pub in Grand Rapids that's trying to get off the ground too.
So,
can't really verify.
I guess it'll be less unique as time goes on. When we were researching this stuff, I did come across a bunch in Canada and London, England, that were cooperatively owned bars. Most of them seem to be around universities. I know for a while the coffee shop at UWM was run, at least collectively, and looked at being a co-op, and apparently the store that they had in the architecture school there was a co-op for a while. But and Black Star Co-op had been doing research for a few years before we opened, and it was really helpful for us to be able to look at their bylaws and articles of incorporation and whatnot and putting together this co-op. But tellingly, and getting back to answer your question, we mostly borrowed from the bylaws of the Riverwest Co-op when we put together the bylaws for this place. So in lots of ways it is structured the same, and those bylaws were borrowed from the Mifflin Street Co-op in Madison, who I'm sure borrowed them from somebody else before then. So there it is.
All right. Well, this is a good segue into the history of this public house. So how did this really get started? What was, who said, hey, let's open up a drinking establishment, make it a co-op?
There were a number of folks from the co-op grocery store located 2.5 blocks south, and they kind of had the crazy idea that we should start more co-ops in the neighborhood. The idea being you can keep local money local, and you can have more control over what businesses are popping up in the neighborhood. It can respond to the unique needs of the neighborhood and the community. So they went through a number of options, including a butcher shop and a bakery, and figured ultimately that being in Milwaukee, a bar would be pretty lucrative. So the idea was that they would start a lucrative co-op, one that generated lots of revenue, and then put the revenue toward starting more co-ops. So as other groups emerged that were trying to get off the ground, raising funds through selling memberships and other ways, they'd be able to get some seed money from the bar or a larger umbrella organization that sort of tied these co-ops together. So they did some research, got some people together around the neighborhood, started selling memberships, and then finally raised enough money to sign a lease on this lovely space. Spent a couple months renovating the space, improving it vastly, if you ask me, and others. And then finally opened our doors on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2011.
All right. You want to add anything to that, Gibson? You know, in the forming of this and people coming together, how easy was it?
I think our experience and reputation with the food co-op made it way easier than it otherwise would have been if, say, a different group of people came together and said, we want to start a co-op hour, we want to start a co-op blank. I think we were able to draw on the connections and social capital that was built around the food co-op. Turned 10 years old last year, so going on our 11th year at the food co-op. And pretty much everyone who was involved in the planning of it, our staff, our current staff, was also involved with the food co-op in some way or another. So it definitely made it easier coming together. That said, there's still, like any venture, you know, risky, and you know, we kind of took a leap, especially when we signed the lease. That was a moment where it was like, all right, this is happening, and you know, we were able to raise some money through member loans. At the very end, the food co-op loaned us a couple grand to give us a push, you know, as far as inventory. And all those have been repaid, and we now have 600 members of our own, many of them who aren't members of the food co-op, or some of our regular customers don't necessarily frequent the food co-op, but yeah, it's a challenge. Vince Bushel, who publishes Riverwest Currents, is on the board of the Riverwest Food Co-op. He's taught me a lot of things over the years, but one of his sayings that he gave me was follow the yeses, and making these things happen. It's important to, when you find a yes, take it, because there's lots of no's out there. And now we're trying to make yeses for others.
Before we go in that direction, I want to just get a little bit more on the workings of the co-op. So what are the roles of the people who, you know, the volunteers, you know, the board, the everyday stuff that has to be done? How does that all work?
Well, okay, so there's the cooperative structure for our business is that we have a board of directors. They are elected by the membership. We have an annual meeting to elect them. So there's nine members of the board of directors. A maximum of 4 of the board of directors can be also workers. And the Workers Collective is the body that covers the day-to-day operations of the bar. So everything from like cleaning the space every morning to bartending to coordinating the events. Am I forgetting finance, running the finances, buying the inventory? That's all run collectively, non-hierarchically, by our Workers Collective. And I think we're comprised of 8. Is there 8 of us at this point?
8 or 9.
So they pretty much are an autonomous group that meets every other week, and then internally, sort of through email and stuff, handles whatever necessary issues come up.
Are there any paid positions?
Yes.
So how many paid positions in the sense that, you know, just there has to be someone who coordinates it, so someone has to... Yeah.
Well, we don't have... the volunteer aspect of it comes in board committees. So, like, none of the work is collected as volunteer. I mean, we spend more hours working than we get paid for typically. But that's just for the love of the project here. But we do have volunteers on our board committees. So there's a membership committee, there's a communications committee, there's a finance committee, there's a building committee, you think of others, communications, human resources. A handful of those have volunteers on them. But we don't typically use volunteer labor.
Wow, that's pretty organized, you know? What do you think about it? That's
I wish that would sound
it sounds really organized.
Another wise mentor, James Godsill, who's involved with Sweetwater Organics and community roofing and other projects, is really big on the idea of chaotic structures and experiences, perhaps.
The roots being chaotic organization. Chaotic.
And we have, you know, here we have a small enough staff that it is relatively easy to communicate, make decisions day to day. You know, so we tend to see each other a lot, and a lot of the folks who work here also come in as patrons. We tend to move in, you know, similar social circles, run into each other at the co-op a lot, and whatever. So there's a lot of communication that happens amongst our staff, which makes it a lot easier without everything having to be meetings. And,
it really becomes more localized, you know,
right?
Which is really nice.
And as far as the volunteers, you know, for 7.5 years I was a volunteer coordinator at the Riverwest Co-op, so I think it is a really important role in co-ops, especially if you're trying to stay connected and accountable to your community and membership. There's a challenge with running a tavern in that we need licensed bartenders. If people are going to take tips, we need to make sure we're doing that legally and ethically and respecting the labor laws and taxes. And, so it does present a challenge in running the bars. Whereas food co-op, you know, there's over 100 volunteers who make that place run every day, and it wouldn't be able to run without them. It's a little harder to plug in volunteers here,
but the way we mitigate that sort of volunteer deficit is by having events all the time. Mm-hmm. So people come to us, members come to us, non-members come to us, bands, local bands, touring bands, national acts come to us. So we get that outside sort of perspective coming in. We have people who don't officially work here hosting events all the time. Trivia is hosted by a guy who lives right over there named Jeb Eben. He's been doing it for probably almost a year.
Our year anniversary. The next one is our year anniversary.
Next one is the year anniversary.
Yeah. So we got to bring it.
Yeah, we will. We'll have to do that. But so that's a good example. We also have we just started doing a homebrew series. So people come in and taste each other's homebrews for free, and So I mean, we get all kinds of community involvement. It's not necessarily in the same avenue as the co-op does through just volunteer labor, but we do have all kinds of people coming in to sort of put together their event ideas or have community meetings, organization meetings all the time.
And that is something that's really unique about the public house is that, you know, there's been days where you come in and there's 2 or 3 different meetings happening. You know, we do try and be an open space for groups to come and do events, but also just hang out. We don't necessarily expect them to, you know, give us money or even necessarily buy drinks, but
it always helps though.
Yeah, it does help. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, we do. And we do take being a co-op seriously, and I think it's something on the mind of all of our staff, all of our board, you know, all the folks who are here. Even a lot of our patrons are well aware that, you know, they own this business, and it, you know, provides a different sense of accountability and to know that, you know, you're here on behalf of the membership and responsible for their not only their money, but with their social investment in the public house too.
I think it's interesting because you think of I generally, at least I do, grocery stores, and that kind of effort in starting out, maybe in somebody's garage, and moves it to the front porch, and eventually you say,
It's about how the food collects better.
Yeah. And then, but with a liquor establishment, there's just, it's kind of a different creature, in a way. And so, the first thought I think a lot of people may have is, people are volunteering there so they can drink, and of course you could make the same argument, people volunteering at a food co-op so they can eat the food, but it's so unusual that it's because it's a place of leisure, I guess you would, generally. You don't think of it as a necessity, unless you're...
No, that's a really good point. It is, and it is a totally different beast in that way, where the food co-op, and a lot of other co-ops are providing services that are much more fundamental, and having access to healthy, affordable food is way more important than being able to drink for cheap. But that's kind of why, how Peter explained the origins of the public house too. I wouldn't be doing this if it was just to do a co-op bar. I mean, it's an idea we joked about for years. It's something that we always met at the Falcon Bowl after public or food co-op board meetings, and we would joke about having a co-op bar. But what made it important for me, and I think most of the people who are involved, was that we are taking all the money from this project to do other development, and the bakery is already.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that. How now that you've paid your loan off and you're pretty stuffed, 600 members plus events coming in. You have just patrons, other people from the neighborhood, and outlining. Hey, I want to see what this is. So you have this established. You're creating some profit. How is that going to generate more into other areas of the community? And talk a little bit about those areas that you're reaching out into.
Well,
we can start in a couple different places. Let's start by talking about the bakery. So, a handful of folks have been talking about, including the founders of this place, have been talking about a cooperative bakery in the neighborhood for a long time. And finally, a group of people got together and put up some flyers around the neighborhood, around town, saying, let's start a co-op bakery. And they had a big meeting. The first meeting was huge. It was here. It took up this entire space. And it was kind of disorganized, but that's how they start. And then they've had subsequent meetings. When was that? Was that winter? It was winter sometime.
Yeah. It was January. Yeah, January 11th.
So they've had several months worth of meetings at this point. And the group has gotten much, much smaller, which also happens as roles get more focused and people are more certain people fall away because they can't dedicate enough time to the project. They can't do the research. They've got other things going on in their lives. So it gets smaller and smaller, but as long as there's sort of like a dedicated core group to make it happen, these things can really come to fruition.
Not to interrupt, but also the size of that meeting also shows the level of interest and support in the neighborhood, which I think is a good indicator, and kind of reflects a co-op. So you have a lot of people who are interested. As things shake out, you have a few people who are going to do the work, but on behalf of those people who are at that initial meeting, so. Yeah.
And you could probably add 5 or 10 people to each person who showed up, saying that people would definitely come and support this.
Exactly. And once the doors open, you'll see another influx of people, and it might not be anybody who's involved with the original group now, which again is a beautiful thing about co-ops. There's, even our current board of directors have been people we're familiar with here, but it's not the same board we had initially. It's not the same group that was, the steering committee and planning committee before we opened. So
it's pretty much totally different, except for maybe 3 or 4 people.
Yeah, but there's still a consistency of, most of those faces are faces who I saw at some of the early meetings when there was a larger group meeting before we opened the public house door. So to connect to what Peter was saying, that room of 30 people or whatever, I think we can look forward to seeing some of those people involved with the bakery 2 years from now, 3 years from now.
Inshallah.
It shows you how, it shows you how an idea, once you put the will towards it, once you put the effort towards it, to go from 0 to 1. That's the hardest part, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just,
Yep.
everybody can sit around and talk about, yeah, this would be great, this would be great, that would be great.
Yeah.
But then when you say, okay, let's do this thing, it gets the lift, and then, that's it. And at that point, you can steer it for as long as you can.
And in classic economic theory, one of the biggest barriers is access and startup, and that's, with co-ops, that's even more the biggest, barrier. It's like, co-ops, once open, are incredibly stable business model. The biggest challenge is getting them open and getting the people involved, getting the time, the volunteers, the capital, so.
There's some crazy statistic. It's like 90% of co-ops are open after the first 5 years, or like remain open 10 years after they open the door, but only 5% of traditional style businesses remain open after their first year.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's...
So there's an investment more than just, profit, motive.
Right.
That there's something else that, people feel they're supporting, when they get involved in this, or when they patronize such a place.
At the food co-op, I couldn't tell you how many times over the year I heard people talk about the feel of the place as a factor there. And it's something we've never been able to quantify or, explain well, but so many people, come in and just talk about the feel of the co-op, or how it brings them back to the 70s, or how there's a sense of community. And just the other day when I was bartending, a couple came in here and it was a slow night, and so I could hear their conversation, and they were, one of the women looked at the other and said, this just brings me back to the 70s, and there you go. So there is that hippie magic involved with the co-ops. And to seriously bring it back, I think Peter could explain more, like when we do talk about the barriers to startup being, barriers to entry being startup, like that is exactly what the Cooperative Alliance is going to do, and what every cent of profit from the public house is going to be invested into.
Yeah, tell us more about that, because that expanding these ideas is really, I think, the new economics. So, and you're at the forefront here.
That's the idea. We want to, speaking as broadly as possible, we want to try to create a model that can be replicated elsewhere. That's about empowerment, not like us trying to set up one large thing that like gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but like us setting up a funding model that can work in other places, like autonomously, and empower communities to respond to their own needs without having to get like a Walmart to move in down the street so that they can buy toilet paper, for instance.
Ownership.
Yeah. So it is slow going though. It's gonna take a long time to actualize it to the point that we want to see it actualized. We've talked about a dozen different
Is it just a matter of funds, or is it just having people?
It's both. I mean, it takes an enormous amount of energy and an enormous amount of time, like time with elbow grease. Yeah. Putting stuff like this together. And starting capital is also hard to come by. I mean, we've been open for a year, and we're still open. The doors are open, but we always need support. Like these things can take off as long as like there's constant high level support.
You sort of need like a Bailey's building and loan.
It's
a wonderful life.
Yeah.
Probably not that far from what we're thinking.
Yeah.
But the idea isn't to give, say, like, let's go back to the bakery again. Like they're going to have to get to a point where they have established that they will be able to be a solvent, autonomous business before the public house itself lends it or gives it any money. And actually, to start talking about that, the public house isn't going to be doing that. It's going to be like a broader organization that we're working on starting. We've got bylaws drafted and articles of incorporation drafted for the Riverwest Cooperative Alliance, which will hopefully be doing advocacy, professional services.
So this is another group, another organization.
It will be a co-op of cooperatives.
Okay.
So the members, probably very few starting out, maybe 5, 6, 7, maybe 9. The cooperatives themselves will be the members of this organization, the Riverwest Cooperative Alliance. And as such, there will be like a very strange sort of commingling of like structures, because if you have a membership that's only 9 and the members are actually businesses, then like who votes at the annual general meeting, for instance, which is something that is legally necessary as per Wisconsin Statute 185, which covers cooperatives. So we're working on that, and it takes a long time. It takes a long time to get these organizations off the ground, and to get the people dedicated to it. But we're extremely optimistic. We're really excited.
It sounds wonderful, and you know, just the expansion, you know, or just the idea of expanding. You know, I mean, you could kind of like a lot of co-ops. You know, once they're kind of established, they're established, and they don't, you know, venture very far from there. But this is moving into like the new economy. And what perfect timing is that?
I totally agree, yeah. Throughout the past year, all the political upheaval and strife, and especially among the left, like reimagining the way an economic system can work toward conscientiousness, toward sustainability, localism, doing things positively rather than negatively.
This is a good segue now. Does this establishment, does the public house have a mission statement? And I'm going to ask you to pull it out.
Right there.
Oh. No,
it's kind of. No. We do have one. It's threefold. Do you have it off the top of your head?
Yeah, well, it's to have affordable, local, and tasty beverages, to be a venue and a community meeting space, and to propagate other cooperatives throughout the neighborhood. So it really is those are the 3 basic principles. Like last year's Riverwest 24, I had to read our mission statement over and over hundreds of times. You'd think I'd remember it, but it's not. It's not popping. That's broadly the 3.
Yeah. And how is it well, we've kind of talked about this, you know, touched on it in and out of this conversation. How's everything working out? I mean, everybody's happy? Everybody feels pretty...
Well, of course not. And and at the same time, we are thrilled and, you know, exhilarated to be a part of this, but it, like anything, presents, you know, challenges. And I mean, you name it, from being a cooperative bar, which is in and of itself a unique, you know, model, being collectively managed, and you know, a lot of the, you know, challenges are also just the running of a bar that any bar owner runs into. You know, luckily here we have, you know, 12 to 15 people who are committed to being surrogate bar owners in one way or another by being here day to day and being a part of the decision making. That also presents a challenge when you don't have you know, somebody like John Okotinski, who sat at the the Falcon Bowl every day and sat at the end of the bar and watched the day-to-day operations of his bar and would bartend all the time. And, you know, I think that's true of a lot of these small neighborhood bars, which we're emulating that model in some ways, where we're not trying to be a fancy Water Street or Brady Street bar. And so there's, you know, it's like anything, a double-edged sword.
Well, talk about this is probably a little darker, but, you know, it's something, I suppose, that crosses people's minds, or will cross people's minds, who would want to open a bar. You get riffraff.
Yeah.
And we're also in Riverwest, which is also a kind of a up and down, you know, this week, that week, you know, we go through stuff.
Overall safety of ourselves and our patrons is, you know, a constant concern, and it's something that we deal with on a regular basis. There's always some kind of incidents, whether it's theft or violence or the threat of violence. You know, it's something that we deal with probably daily in one way or another. The riffraff, you know, most of our bartenders have lived in the neighborhood a while and have experience dealing with drunkards and riffraff from our day-to-day lives. But it's, you know, and it kind of connects, you know, so something else you were hitting on earlier about, you know, it being both a co-op and it being a bar. And, you know, we've talked about this idea, there's almost like two public houses at times. There's a public house, which is a cooperative, which is this community meeting space, and then there's a public house at 1 a.m. when, you know, it's people who are drunk and people who are walking by on the street, and, you know, those are two, you know, kind of different. It's hard to explain, and which also connects to the challenge you were talking about earlier. Like, you know, especially our bartenders are having to learn how to deal with both of those realities. You know, like, okay, so I have somebody, you know, threatening a patron with a weapon, and I have to be well versed in consensus decision making and, you know, making sure that I'm transparently communicating to my coworkers and membership. It's two different challenges. But it's not much different from how it was at the food co-op too, where we still have to deal with challenging customers, and organic, natural foods draw a certain kind of people, beautiful, creative people, also tinfoil hat type of people, and being an open community space also, you know, you want to be welcoming to neighbors regardless of age or, you know, state of inebriation, but that presents a challenge too. So with both places, you're dealing with the reality of it being a business, bottom line, full stop. Gotta, you know, stay in business. We don't want to say how cool it was while it lasted, and it being a space, you know, that is open, welcoming, has the hippie magic, has the honest sense of ownership, you know.
And that can only come from people being involved, and the difference is that there isn't a boss hanging over you saying, this is how I want my place to look. Right. You know, so you get that.
Got a bunch, you got bosses telling you.
Yeah, but you know, the more creative types will say, well, can I do this? And you know, that at least that opens the opportunity for them, for someone to say yes. You know.
Yes, exactly. Probably yes.
Exactly.
And you know, and something I've talked about over the years at the food co-op, and is definitely true at the public house as well, is, you know, basically you have a handful of people who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting and dealing with the day-to-day pressures and stresses, so everyone else can enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's part of your obligation to the mission or the job. And if you don't want that, you know, there's definitely more lucrative places to work. So go get it. Go do it.
I wanted to ask if, you know, you thought of expanding, you know, this concept, this idea, but in the beginning you talked about these other cities that are also developing this. So do either of you go and consult with communities to, you know, get this off the ground, get people who are interested saying, you know, how do you do this? How did you do this?
Well, Gibson has consulted others for the foundation of other co-ops a number of times. I think as far as like the particular project that involves starting a lucrative business to fund to help other co-ops start and
flourish.
Yes. I think we're not quite there yet. We've got to make it happen here and happen like successfully and like honestly and transparently first. we have to set the example.
So you're
before
still
we start
building this
saying that we have an
foundation,
example. Yeah.
but so from what I can tell, it looks pretty stable. I mean, it looks like you're using good ingredients all the way around.
Sure.
And materials. Yeah. Everybody's knocking. There's a lot of wood in here too.
Always precarious.
The pew you just knocked down came from All People's Church, which is an awesome church, and Pastor Steve is also on our board of directors. It's amazing. We have a Lutheran minister on the board of directors of a bar. You know, one of the things that we've learned, you know, the board, one of the roles of the board of directors of the co-op, the major role is to be financially and legally responsible for the business. And all of us involved on the board, involved with the day-to-day finances of the place, have learned you can never rest on your laurels. You know, I mean, it's like any business. You know, it's always going to be a challenge. You know, as soon as you get comfortable, something's going to come up. You know, so. You know, I think you do hit a point where it really is like you kind of have a good template, you know, on the day-to-day running of the place where it is stable. From my experience, we're about 5 years away from that. And it's because it takes a lot of trial and error, failing, trying again, failing better. And so... Yeah, it may seem stable. You know, we're still figuring out. We need this to be lucrative, and if the public house doesn't make money, we're not going to be able to fund the bakery, and we're not going to be able to, you know, create more co-ops with our revenue. I think these cooperatives will still happen, but you know, the whole point of doing this is to help make it easier and spread quicker the community ownership.
Well, let me ask you, is the organization open to accepting donations, funds? I mean, is that
take
something?
Any donation at any time. But
Can we?
Yeah.
Can we? Sure.
Yeah. It's not tax deductible, and
yes,
you know.
that's the caveat.
But yeah, we'll take it. Co-ops are, in every sense, taxed and treated like a traditional corporation. In a traditional corporation, levels of investment with stock ownership will control how much say you have. In a co-op, it is one member, one vote. Everyone has the same say. Otherwise, basically like any other corporation, the state of Wisconsin, we're lucky to have state laws that govern, you know, cooperatives and are designed to protect both the business and the membership as owners and ensure that the members are owners of the business. Yeah. But otherwise it is treated like any other corporation. So, you know, we can take donations, but it won't allow for a tax write-off. And loans, we try and avoid commercial loans for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
And that's one of the advantages of being a cooperative is you do have access to that member capital and member loans. It's a system that we prefer because, again, if we are paying a return, and we did pay interest on several of the loans, it was paid back to the person who loaned it to us, not to the bank.
Yeah. Which is always, you know, preferable, you know, in a lot of ways, because again, you have this the idea of the profits going into, you know, building the community as opposed to somebody's pocket is a huge difference.
Yeah,
you know, you
absolutely.
build his house or her house rather than, you know, spreading the wealth.
Yeah.
And I think, again, you know, there's that the economy right now is just almost begging for that. You know?
Absolutely.
So coming in on this right now was a really good time. Now I know that there are some businesses that are, you know, having a struggle. I'm seeing more and more being closed up, boarded up, along with the houses now. How's this doing?
Finance.
Well, yeah, part of my job is to, you know, be concerned with that on a day-to-day, and we have good cash flow. Most of it at this point is due to our member equity. If we had to pay back every membership right now, I suppose we would have enough actually to cover it at this point with a little left over when it comes to inventory and what we have in the bank, but we're not at the point where we'd like to be.
Is that just because of the economy, you think, or,
No.
or is it because just the process of going, establishing a business?
Yeah, I don't think the economy has much, if anything, to do with it, to be honest. Both food and booze are relatively inelastic products, and that people still buy them regardless of their income. So we definitely cannot blame the economy for any struggles we've had. I mean, most of it has been just the day-to-day running of business and being mindful of your costs and your income.
Now, if people want to come here, people want to get involved, who do they contact? Where can they go?
Well, they could just stop in and talk to their friendly bartender.
Okay. How would they contact you, say, over the internet?
We have an email address. It's info@riverwestpublichouse.org.
Okay.
To book an event, it's events@riverwestpublichouse.org. And to check in and see what's up, we have a blog/website, riverwestpublichouse.org. And we have a Twitter handle. It's RW Public House, and we have a Facebook, Riverwest Public House.
Well, this is wonderful. So you're all out there on the social network. There's no way that people cannot find you if they just typed in Riverwest Public House.
We do have a pretty discreet sign on the front of the building.
Yeah, they can definitely find us on the internet, finding the actual building. My aunt just told me last week that when she tries to send her friends here, she tells them to drive down Locust Street, look for the shitty signage, and that's the public house.
Sometimes the light maybe won't be on.
Well, you do have the park next door. That's a really.
It is.
If you hit the park.
Yeah. When you see Garden Park, that's where you're at. And on a serious level, our proximity to Garden Park is not an accident. That was one of the reasons we chose this location. That is a community-owned space. It's a city lot, but the community has taken care of it for the last 12 years and operated a farmer's market, took care of the landscaping.
And it housed the original Gordon Park Food Co-op and Outpost.
Yes.
When it was the Pulaski building. A little Riverwest history there for you.
Boom.
So that's there's something magic under the ground there, I guess, huh? Something
It's an
springs
ancient
forth.
hippie burial ground.
Well, I want to thank my two guests today, Peter Murphy and Gibson Caldwell, for talking to us about the Riverwest Public House on Riverwest Radio and 3 Words Radio. All I can say is this has been a pleasure. I learned an awful lot, and I wish you all the greatest success. I'll try and help that.
Likewise.
When I can. And I just want to remind the public that, you have these opportunities to get involved in your community and also preserve your airwaves. You own them. Take good care. Thank you very much. This is Liza Brooks out from the Riverwest Public House. Have a good day.
That's all.